Hello, everybody, and welcome to the section 1 of chapter 4, where we start to get into the Civil War. As you can see from here, this red line that is, going roughly around, starting at Texas and then moving all the way onto, let's just see right down here, moving around up there over Virginia. These areas are considered the South, and those were the states that seceded. And seceding is from the words, secession. Remember, it's not succeed. Notice it's secede, secession. And this just means that a state is leaving the United States. And of course, the northern states up here represented in blue, and of course there are some here on the west as well. They, of course, were very against allowing any state to leave the Union. And so, what started the Civil War essentially is states leaving the country, and the rest of the states saying, "Hey, you know what? That's just not cool." Now, according to the southern states, they felt that they were justified in leaving the country because they believed in popular sovereignty, which just means the right to vote for or against a proposed law such as slavery. And the people in the South said, look, we like slavery. It's part of our everyday existence. It's, part of what makes the South the South. And of course, they ignored the, moral implications of slavery and how disgustingly horrible an institution slavery is. Apparently that didn't really concern the people in the South. Now, of course, there were some people in the South who were against slavery for moral purposes, but for the most part, slavery enjoyed support among the people. And the people in the South felt, hey, if we all vote for slavery and it's our people's choice, we believe in, popular sovereignty. If our people want it, why can't they have it? And of course, the answer to that question is because slavery is believably immoral and a despicable practice, and no civilized human being should practice slavery under any circumstances. And that seems a pretty obvious answer, but apparently the South didn't agree. Now, of course, you've probably heard about the Underground Railroad, and it's not literally a railroad, obviously, but the analogy is, well, you go from one place to another place, you have stops along the way, and essentially it was designed to get people out of the South, get slaves out of the South, and eventually make it up to the North, where there is no slavery, and they are safe there. And of course, the term fugitive means that you're on the run from the law. Now, later on, which really contributes to the outbreak of the Civil War, we'll see something called the Fugitive Slave Act, which actually allows people to go and capture slaves that had escaped. But we'll get to that a little bit later. You probably already heard of Harriet Tubman, one of the most famous people in American history. Of course, she was one of the people that helped organize the Underground Railroad and help people escape. I really like this quote here, and if you just think about what it means to yourself for a second. What does it mean when I could have freed 1,000 more if they only knew they were slaves? That's just such an interesting statement to think about. Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of a very much anti-slavery novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin. It was so popular in the North because it really showed the Northerners, hey, this is what slavery is like. Many people in the North really didn't have a good understanding of how horrible and how terrible slavery was. And Uncle Tom's Cabin really gave the North a taste of what living in slavery was like. And of course, that book was banned in the South, and she got death threats for writing it. And it didn't seem to matter. A very important book, and it really helped open the eyes to many people about how horrible slavery was. Franklin Pierce, 14th president. Nothing really to add to that. It's a quick one there. Dred Scott. So this story is a little complicated. His owner took him to a free territory for a period of time. I believe it was Illinois, and he sued for his freedom. His argument was that the moment that he set foot in a free state, he was no longer a slave. And if you think about it, if slavery doesn't exist in this state, how can you possibly be a slave? It doesn't exist. So when he returned to the South, he sued for his freedom. And in probably one of the worst Supreme Court decisions in the history of the United States, there were others, of course. Plessy versus Ferguson, seems to be one of them. But in a really horrible Supreme Court decision, the Supreme Court ruled against him. They didn't even think he had the right to sue. They barely considered him a person, let alone a citizen. And it was a really terrible decision. And the pro-slavery group took that as a win for them. Hopefully, we all know Abraham Lincoln, say often credited with freeing the slaves. Interesting, because when we'll talk more about the Emancipation Proclamation, freed some slaves, and a little controversial. Lincoln also, it's not entirely clear that his commitment to slavery was as firm as others might have thought. If you look at some of the speeches that Lincoln had given in the past, they seem to not exactly be ringing endorsements of equality. And then again, there were other speeches that beautifully advocated for ending slavery. But overall, he is the person that did lead us through perhaps the most difficult time in history, and that, of course, being the Civil War. The Confederacy, or the Confederate States of America, is the South, and they were the part of the country that seceded. Remember, there's that word, secede, to leave the country, and they formed their new country, which was called the Confederate States of America. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States of America. And that is it.